We're going to be replacing the radiator and hoses and everything on my 2010 Subaru Forester XT Turbo. As you can see, there is coolant sprayed all around the engine bay. First thing we're going to do is take the engine protective cover off the top so we can get access to all of the hoses. So there are 4 little push plugs that snap right out, and out comes that plastic cover. Now I'm just going to have a look what's inside the radiator. The answer is nothing, because as it should turn out, the top tank ended up letting go from the core. We're going to be undoing all of the little spring clip hose clamps and disconnect all of these top hoses. So there are 2 that go to the turbo cooling top tank, and then of course there are the main radiator hoses. And where you can't see them are also 2 transmission cooler lines. So off come those spring clips and off come those hoses. Okay, now that those guys are undone, there are also 2 plugs going into the thermo fans. There is one on the left and one on the right side of the 2 fans. So make sure you get those out. And the whole radiator is held in with these 2 brackets. Undo those 2 12mm bolts and out she comes. This is the air intake. It's actually a little coupler for the cold air intake that feeds into the factory air box. There is 1 push plug and a couple of clips. Undo those because it sits on top of the radiator. Now we're taking out the overflow tank. You just lever where the retaining pin is and the whole thing pops out and lifts out. Now what you can't see is I am currently undoing the 2 transcooler lines. So they have 2 spring clips and then it's just pushed on lines. Okay, so off come those lines now. Oh yes, something else. Just undo the 2 10mm bolts that hold the thermostat housing on. Don't try and pull the hose out from the bottom, it is just a nightmare. So now that the radiator's out, we can pull out the old thermostat. Of course, it's also been replaced. There's the old housing and the old bottom hose. Much easier when it's out of the car. You pull off this shield, and then you remove those 2 transcooler lines. And we're going to be reusing those. There is the new radiator, so we'll reinstall those transcooler lines. And make sure you redo the spring clips that retain those while you're at it. There we go, spring clamp. And put the heat shield back on, and the radiator is pretty well ready to go in. Now, that is a new thermostat with a new thermostat gasket. It clips into the front of the water pump. And then we put on the thermostat housing. That's also been sourced new. Line it up, put in the 2 10mm bolts, do them up finger tight, and then grab your 1/4" ratchet and tighten them down. You will feel it bottom out. Now we can put the radiator back in. On the bottom of the radiator there are 2 pins and there are 2 locating grommets on the bottom. Just find the grommets, line the pins up, and then once the radiator is vertical, push it down and it's seated. Now we're going to put the brackets back on to hold it in place so we're not fighting with it constantly. Okay, now we slide on the 2 transcooler lines and then put the spring clamps back on. Now you're not actually going to see what goes on here. I do recommend throwing out these spring clamps and just go and get the screw kind. So that was the new bottom radiator hose that's in. We're reinstalling the thermo fans. Same thing, they have locating pins that go into grommets. Just line them up, push them down. Once they're both located, put in the driver side screws for both of them to hold the fans in place, because the passenger side screws on both fans, as you can see, are used for the overflow pipe. So now the overflow pipe's in and the fans are secured. We're going to plug the wires back in for the thermo fans. And now we're going to put on a new top hose, and you can see those new screw type hose clamps there. There we go. As it should turn out, these aftermarket replacement hoses I got are a slightly thicker diameter and wouldn't actually work with the spring clamps, so save yourself some heartache and just go for the screw kind. And don't tighten them with a screwdriver, that is an 8mm socket. Okay, that is the overflow back on and the coolant top tank is connected up. Now I'm going to be pouring genuine Subaru 50/50 coolant into the radiator until it is full. Put the cap back on. Now we'll change angles slightly. And now I am filling up the coolant tank for the turbo. Once that is done, squeeze the radiator hose a few times to pump out any air. Just keep topping it up until it bubbles over. And you're pretty well done at this point. Just put on the radiator cap and fire it up, get it to operating temperature. What I'm not going to bore you with is putting the plastic cover back on and the air intake, but this is pretty well done. After idling it for 10-15 minutes, check for leaks. If there's no leaks, you should be good to go.